Hello, and welcome to my second video on Weimar and Nazi Germany, setting up the Weimar Republic. If you are studying history at GCSE, Weimar and Nazi Germany 1918 to 1939, then I really hope you'll find this useful. And with that, let's get started. The 9 months from November 1918 to July 1919 were difficult for the new republic, whilst they tried to put a new government into place. Ebert took the following steps to try and instill confidence. Civil servants who had helped Germany under the Kaiser kept their jobs, and they worked with soldiers and workers' councils that had been set up by local people to ensure the state kept running. This would include collecting taxes and running public services like schools. Ebert promised General Gruner that the army would not be reformed, and in return they would keep the new republic in power. He promised leaders of industry like Hugo Steins that the new republic would not take their land or factories and that there would be no nationalisation of private businesses. Finally, Ebert promised leaders of trade unions like Karl Ligon that the new republic would try to achieve an 8-hour working day. Yet despite this, some extremist parties were not happy, and there were frequent demonstrations and riots in major cities. Ebert had managed to achieve a fragile form of control which allowed long enough to create a new constitution, but he knew that he needed to act quickly. The National Assembly. The Council of People's Representatives, which took control of Germany in 1918, was only temporary. Ebert announced national elections to select a National Assembly. They would then go on to create a new constitution for Germany. The elections took place in January 1919, and 82% of the electorate, which is people who were allowed to vote in an election, they voted. Moderate parties gained most seats, with the SPD winning 40% and the Centre Party winning 20%. With that, they met for the first time in February 1919 in Weimar, 250 kilometres away from Berlin, where there was still violence and unrest. On the 31st of January, they agreed to a new constitution, with 262 voting for it and 75 voting against. This became known as the Weimar Republic. So what was the Weimar Constitution? The Constitution was a set of principles which the new government would be ruled by. They had a head of state, which was a president and was elected every 7 years. They played no role in the day-to-day running of government, but they chose the Chancellor and had important powers that they could use in emergencies, like Article 48. The government was made up of the Chancellor and the Cabinet. The Chancellor was the head of the government, and they chose all the government ministers that made up the Cabinet, whilst the Cabinet was made up of the most important ministers who worked closely with the Chancellor and the main decision-making body of the government. Then we have the Parliament. Parliament was made up of two houses, the Reichstag and the Reichsrat. Normally laws had to be passed through both. The Reichstag was the more powerful of the two houses and controlled taxation. They were directly elected by the people every 4 years. The Reichsrat was also elected every 4 years, and they represented the regions of the government. Each region sent a certain amount of representatives depending on the size of the region. Then we have the electorate. This consisted of all men and women over the age of 20. This was seen as one of the most democratic systems of the time, with many strengths. Firstly, for the first time in Germany, men and women could vote, and this was seen as a significant step forward in democracy. Next, the Reichstag was elected under a system of proportional representation, which meant that every party was allocated a seat per 60,000 votes they received. This meant that even smaller parties could then have a voice. There were also checks and balances in place to ensure that no one person or group had too much power. For instance, the president could be replaced every 7 years with elections. They were the one who chose the Chancellor, who was usually the leader of the largest party, but the president could also dismiss the Reichstag and call elections if he felt he needed to. The Chancellor needed support from the majority of the Reichstag and the Reichsrat to pass laws. The Reichstag may have been the more powerful of the two houses, but the Reichsrat could delay any new laws passed. The central government held more power than it had done under the Kaiser, but local government, known as the Länder, controlled key services such as police, courts, and schools. Yet even with these checks and balances, and these are seen as strengths, there were still some weaknesses. Proportional representation led to small parties winning seats, which is great, but it meant that often no single party had a clear majority. This led to coalition governments, often resulting in compromise and lack of clear, strong policies. Next, coalitions often fell apart, and between 1919 and 1923, there were 9 coalition governments. In a crisis, there could be a lack of decision-making as a result of a coalition. The solution was Article 48 that stated that in a crisis, the Chancellor could ask the President to pass a law without the support of the Reichstag. Yet it doesn't specifically say what an emergency is, and by around 1930, this article was used frequently to pass laws rather than the Reichstag, bypassing democracy and making the constitution seem weak. Even though it gave power to the electorate, there was always this feeling that the Weimar Republic was forced on people and they didn't have a choice. During the German Revolution, the government had used the army to quell any public riots whilst they were in Weimar. Several parties that were elected to the government, such as nationalists and communists, also openly opposed democracy and opposed a new Weimar constitution. Therefore, whilst the Weimar constitution can be hailed as a democratic system with many strengths, it is safe to say that weaknesses in the system would cause many issues for them as they progressed. And that is the creation of the Weimar Constitution and the Weimar Republic. I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it useful. Just think, can you identify key features of the Constitution? What are the strengths of this form of government? Why might the weaknesses of this Constitution cause issues? Feel free to comment in the comment section below. And if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks, guys.